So, welcome in the second part of the chapter 10, life process respiration part 2. So, in last video we have discussed about the various information about respiratory system in general. Now today we will discuss about respiratory apparatus in animal. Last video I have told about the respiratory apparatus in single or small animals. Now in today's video we will discuss about the higher animal, what are the various type of respiratory system or apparatus present in them. So starting from first, that is in insect, then we will discuss about fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and ultimately into the birds, and finally we will discuss about the respiratory system in human being. So let's continue the topic and start with the insects. So first we discuss about insect. So how the respiratory apparatus present in insect. So in some insect, their outer body is covered with a special type of material called as a cuticle, which is permeable for water and oxygen. So simply the oxygen diffuse inside their body and CO2 diffuse out of their body. So in some insect, cuticle permeable for water and oxygen. So the simply gaseous exchange takes place by the process called as a diffusion. But in most of the insect there is a special type of system present for the respiration. In other it is called as a tracheal system. So in this type of tracheal system there is a single tube like structure which is run around the whole insect's body. This tube is called as a trachea, and the whole system that is present inside the insect called as a tracheal system. So because these run around the body whole around, so it supplies the oxygen to all over the body. Trachea, or also called as a air tubule. So these tubes also called as a air tubules or all called as a trachea. These runs around the whole body of the insect. And these trachea or mini tubules open to outside of the body via pore or hole that is called as a spiracles. So that hole or pores that connect insect body from outer to outer environment called as a spiracles. So why these spiracles, oxygen get inside the insect body and CO2 get out of the insect body. So let's have a diagrammatic representation of this system. So roughly this is a insect's body and the tracheal system run around like this. So these red lines here shows the tracheal system, and in between these small sac like structure like bag like structure present, those called as a air sac. These air sac directly connected to the tracheal system or air tubules, and these air tubules open outside the body that as a spiracle. So the O2 enters from spiracle to the tracheal system and air sac, and CO2 comes out from the air sac and tracheal system to the outer environment. So and the cell of the insect directly connected to this tracheal system and the air sac from where the CO2 got exchanged and O2 got exchanged. O2 accepted by the cells and CO2 leave the body from these spiracles. So in this system of the tracheal system in the insect, the respiratory apparatus occur. In further we elaborate the tracheal system. How does the tracheal system works? Now in further process, the air that come inside this tracheal system now goes to in the finer branches of the tracheal system called as a tracheoles. The major tube that is called as a trachea divide into the small tubes called as a tracheoles. There is a liquid present in these tracheoles called as a hemolymph. Like in human, there is a liquid present inside the tubules called as a blood. Same way in an insect there is a liquid present in the tip of the tracheole called as the hemolymph. This hemolymph contain the oxygen that is carried from outer environment to the insect, and these tracheoles is directly contacted with the cells of that particular organism. Now the oxygen that is present in the hemolymph get into the cell by the simple diffusion process, and the waste carbon dioxide that is produced by the respiration chemical equation, the CO2 got into this tracheal system and go out of the body when the circulatory system or tracheal system take it out from the body by the spiracles. So in the insect, this is how a respiratory apparatus work. Now in further part we will discuss about respiratory apparatus in fishes. Now most of the aquatic animal like fishes, they have to swim under the water continuously. So aquatic animal have to breathe under water. So they absorb that oxygen dissolve in that particular water. So for that they have a special type of respiratory apparatus called as a gills. So these gills are present in the either side of the mouth in the fishes with the in the gill chamber, and that gill chamber is protected by a bony flap called as a operculum. That means there is a gills present and gills are covered by a bony flap like structure called as a operculum that can be openable. So that water that comes in mouth of the fishes which carries the oxygen. Now the oxygenated water come in the oral cavity, and these oxygenated water comes in contact with the gills, and gills are rich with the blood supplies of the blood vessels. That means the oxygen present in the water directly diffuse into the blood capillaries, and that carbon dioxide that is present in the blood is diffused into that particular water, and that water comes out with from the operculum with the carbon dioxide in that and leave the body of the fishes. So this is how the respiratory apparatus work in the fishes, because they have a special system called as a gill. Gills are present in the gill chamber in either side of the mouth. That means both the side of the mouth of the fishes there is a gill chamber present. Inside that the gills present, and the gills are directly supplies with the blood vessels. Those carries the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. And this gill chamber is surrounded by or covered by a bony flap called as a operculum. So whenever the fish drink that particular water, they are living, that has some dissolved oxygen. These oxygen directly contacted with the gills. Those in gills the blood capillaries present, the oxygen present in the water diffuse into those blood capillaries, and the carbon dioxide that is present in that particular blood vessels come out into that particular water and go out of the operculum and out of the body. This is how the respiratory apparatus work in fishes and most of the aquatic animals. Now in further part we will discuss about the respiratory apparatus of the amphibians. That means those animals that can live inside the water and outside the water, that means on the terrestrial surface. So now in amphibian animals, that means those animals which lives in water as well as on the terrestrial or land surface. So they have to breathe inside the water in their early stage of the life, and the most of the adult life they live on the land area. So they have to have a more number of the respiratory apparatus for their process. So as you can see, there are 4 ways in which a amphibian, for example a frog, can breathe. So firstly, like baby frog, also called as a tadpole. So tadpole, the early stage of the frog that lives inside the water, so they have to use the dissolved oxygen of that water they are living. So they have gills like fishes. Those gills are again have a blood supplies, and these gills absorb the dissolved oxygen into the blood, and now the carbon dioxide that is present in the blood diffuse out of that blood capillaries through the gills and through water. So tadpole live inside the water and have gills to absorb dissolved oxygen of the water. Secondly, the very important organ that is called as a lungs. So most of the time that adult amphibian live their life on the land area, so they have to breathe through the lungs. So adult live in the lungs, they have breathing, they are not as sufficient as a higher animal. So in this case, amphibian, they have lungs, but they are not as efficient in the higher animal like reptiles, birds and human being. So they have to modify their respiratory apparatus to another two techniques. So first one is why? Mouth cavity. So how does the amphibian respire through the mouth cavity? Their roof of the mouth of the oral cavity is this something like this. Roof of the oral cavity richly supply with the blood vessel and direct contact with the roof of the mouth. So rich in blood supply and capillaries. During the process, when the amphibian using the mouth cavity for their respiratory purpose, so their passage to the lungs is closed, and so they use the both lungs and oral cavity for their respiratory requirement in the surface or land area. Now ultimately by fourth technique, via skin. So how does the frog or any amphibian animal able to respire through the skin? Because their skin surface is very loose, thin and rich in blood supply. Also minor pipes or blood capillaries present beneath the skin. Beneath meant under the skin, and the skin is very thin, loose connected, and also they have a special type of gland which secrete a liquid. That's why the skin is moist. So the dissolved oxygen of the water and the dissolved oxygen in the environment diffuse into the skin, and now from skin to the blood capillaries. So this is how a amphibian or frog can respire or breathe by four different techniques: via gills in early stage of the life, via lungs in adults in terrestrial surface, mouth cavity also in terrestrial surface, and via skin in water as well as terrestrial surface. So this is how an amphibian, for example frog, respire or respiratory apparatus. Now in further section, the respiratory apparatus of the reptiles, that means those animals like snakes, lizards, crocodile, and respiratory apparatus of the birds. Now in the reptiles, those animals like for example snakes and lizards, they have lungs for their respiratory apparatus. Their lungs are very thin walled as compared to the other animal like birds and mammals, and very elastic. Because of the thin wall of the lungs, they are very elastic. That's why the more amount of the air can be trapped inside those lungs. So in their lungs, when oblong means in long, elongated, when there is no air present in them. So when they were empty, they are oblong in shape, and when they inflated means when there is air present inside those lungs, they are round in shape. So whenever they oblong, when they are empty, there is no air, and their lungs shows round shaped when there is air present inside those lungs. So in the reptile animal, their lungs have a small sac or bag like structure inside the lung, and this bag or sac like structure called as a alveoli. Now the alveoli usually present in a group, and one here you can see a magnified version of a one alveoli. These sac like alveoli directly contacted with the blood vessel. So whenever the oxygen comes inside this alveolar sac, it go into the blood vessel, and the CO2 that is present inside the blood vessel come in the alveolar sac and go out of the respiratory system through the nostrils or the nasal opening of that particular animals. So this is how the respiratory system present to the reptiles. Now in further section, we will discuss about the respiratory apparatus of birds. Now in case of the birds, they are their respiratory apparatus are very specialized because they need more power or huge power to fly. So they require more amount of oxygen compared to the other animals. So their lungs or is somewhat inelastic with presence of the air sac. So apart from the reptiles and the mammals or in humans, the alveoli present. In case of birds, there is a air sacs presents or pouches of the air present between the internal organs. So these air pouches are present in between the internal organs of the birds, and they air sac help complete the aeration of the blood. So whenever they respire or breathe, in birds lungs are aerated twice in the each breath. So in human we will see that in a single breath, single time the aeration completed, but in case of the birds, lungs are aerated twice in the each breath. So in a single breath their lungs aerated just the double amount of any other animal. That lead to the complete oxidation of their blood. That means in a single breath, large amount of the air trapped inside the lungs or air sac that can be transferred to the blood, make the blood oxygenated. So this is how the respiratory apparatus or system works in the birds. In further section, we'll discuss about the respiratory system of the respiratory system of human being. And as you can see that human is categorized as mammals. So and the various breathing mechanism and respiratory mechanism in the human.